Hey, I'm live. Cool. There is no one in the chat at the moment, but that's fine because this video is for you, Josh, and you won't be seeing it until whenever you see it this evening. But I thought if I put it off, I'll run out of steam and I won't do it, you know. So wait for a couple viewers. Oh, and they showed up right on time. All I did was a tiny intro talking to Josh, basically, who this is for. Hopefully it's going to be pretty easy and fairly inexpensive. So he wants to put black around his eyes for a concert. I cannot remember what it was. It's Alice Cooper or AC/DC or something. Does AC/DC do eye makeup? I don't think it's Kiss. I think I would have remembered if it was Kiss. I don't know. It's hard to remember things. So it's just a shadow, but it looks like there's this big fold, like a big crease on me, like I'm a Frankenstein sewn together from different bits and bobs. I really hope I'm still online. My internet's been cutting in and out lately. I'll just do a tweet saying that I actually am live because I keep forgetting to do that. I have to start editing these at some point. Starting soonish. I mean, I can't edit the live ones, obviously. We're on. We'll also do a story. Because I figured we might as well also do a story. And since there are no people in the chat right now, and yet it's still going, damn, I really should edit these afterwards. Like, allergies. I'm allergic to everything. Fitz, go and drink some still water. You don't need the fountain all the time. Hello, who's here and are you staying? Should I begin? But I am going to read a story as well. It's going to be an Emma James one. I don't really have the thing for Marjorie today. But hopefully this will be a really simple tutorial. Hey, Danny. Thank you so much for the good sesh today. Your surprise was very surprising. It was so good. Oh my god. You are really good at bitchcraft. All right, so the products that I've got. These little wee round cotton pads. You can get them pretty cheaply from anywhere. And micellar cleansing water. Doesn't have to be this. It can be makeup wipes, but for God's sake, make sure you get makeup wipes that are okay to use on your eyes. I used to work in a haunted house, and the makeup wipes were like people would do a frenzy over the makeup wipes. Hey, John. So yeah, if you get, so I know what it is like to try and get this black shit off your eyes without any proper eye makeup removers. It's not pretty. It hurts. So yeah, doesn't have to be cotton pads and micellar water. It can be wipes, but just make sure they're okay for your eyes. Some of them aren't. And I did that to take off my own eye makeup, which I usually don't bother to take off. I'm like Baby Jane. I just cake a new layer on every day. Right, so we covered taking them off afterwards. And now, right, this is Wet n Wild Multi-Stick or Baton Multitâche. Multitasking. Do not use nail polish remover. No. A lot of blind people out there. really thinking about their choices. This or a similar eye one, pretty cheap, not tested on animals. Don't know if they're vegan. I think they're vegan. Can't remember. But essentially, it's just a big crayon that you use to draw on your face. So, oh no, sorry, I should do all the products before I actually crack into it. You're going to pretty much chuck it all on. And then you can use a brush. Any brush will do, just a cheap one, doesn't matter. And some black powder eyeshadow. The powder eyeshadow might set it. It'll make it stay on for longer because this shit wears off really quickly if you don't use the powder to set. And it's a pretty good trick to use every day if you're just using a bit of liquid eyeliner. Stick the eyeliner on, set it with some powder, stays on longer, looks better. I'm not a makeup guru of any kind. YouTube makeup people are crazy to me. They're like artists. They're doing chiaroscuro. They're transforming their faces into different people. I can't do that. But I can give you a tiny kind of nuts and bolts thing. So, I've got my little mirror. And I'm going to try and hold it away from my face. You can see what I'm doing on my eye. My little Wet n Wild stick. They are inexpensive, especially compared to, proper brands. What am I going to do? I'm going to do a slight, kind of a bird thing. See? Goes on lovely, just like a real crayon. Well, not like a real crayon. Much nicer. There we go. Never tried to do my eyes like a bird before. It's not very good. See that? Easels peasels. Just on the other eye. Stopping at what you might call the crease or just above. And we don't need to blend all this shit in because it's a concert. You're not actually doing Hawk makeup, Having said that, I have never been to a concert. I do not enjoy crowds, and people who are famous do not enjoy my hometown. And I do not blame them for that. So you got your crayon on. It's not, blended or anything. It looks kind of crappy, but it kind of looks all right if that's what you're going for. If you're fine with that. But this shit will wear off so fast. So, got my little brush, got my little black powder. I'm using too much. Whoa. Fitzy, not right now. I'm just gonna tap it on. And you probably might be able to see this actually. It has already started going kind of shitty and grey on my eyelid, just from my eyelid opening up and down. And then you can kind of, smudge the sides around. Right? More of that black powder. And just pat it. Beep, 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 beep. Just beep it in. That's all good. Right, so that that eye, right? I actually don't know if you can tell the difference. But one of them looks pretty good. The other one looks like shit. It looks bad. So we're just going to do the same thing on the other eye. I did my own makeup sometimes in the haunted house when there wasn't time. And also, doing this kind of thing for the eyes is very easy. And the head actor, the lady running the show, she always wanted the makeup artist to put a ton of black eyeliner on me and a ton of black eyeshadow so that my eyes would be all freaky in the dark. So I knew how to do that myself. Saved a bit of time. And it meant that I could use my own products from home, so less chance of catching the terrible 24-hour bug that just ripped through our cast on the prison thing. I did catch it, but the bug was horrible. At least one night every time there'll be a few people absent because they were throwing up and thinking they were dying. Just done a really big smudge. That's pretty cool. Did I put some powder down here? Can't remember. Right. So whatever shape you want to have around your eyes, I'm kind of liking this vaguely bird-like thing. But whatever shape you want, if you want to do like a fucking star like Mr. Kiss, the leader of Kiss. This is how I clean my brushes. I don't clean my brushes every day. I'm not Louis Vuitton's. This ain't Versailles. I think I've cleaned them once. That's my business. That's not really any of yours. If you want to tidy it up or something, you can use a tiny little stick thing, but I think it's pretty good smudged, actually. And then anything you don't like, hasn't worked out for you, or if you want to tidy the edges up, you can use a bit of micellar water, a bit of little cotton roundy rounds. Tissues will fall apart. They won't work. Handy towels are way too coarse to use on your eyes. Get the wet cotton things. They're good. I don't know how much of this I need to actually be explaining. So I'm just explaining everything. I'm not sure I liked the bird thing. Look at that. Look, I fucked it. That looks not so good. Shit. This is also a thing that will happen to you. Some people swear by applying stuff with their hands. Like, I would have patted the black powder on with my hands, but I wanted to sort of do it in a slightly more, in a way that indicated that I am a tool using primate. It's one of the things that I brag about. Now this looks a little bit weird to me because I've brought it right in, like right in there where most people put a little bit of highlighter that makes it look like they have sparkly sleep in their eyes 24/7. Never really understood that. Fitz has given up on his water. So it'll look like whatever shape you make, but like this. Thanks for being here, Alex. You can watch the rest of the video later. I'm going to read a quick story. Sleep well. Bye. And if you want to wear this for going out or something, just to make it look slightly less sharp or harsh or whatever, I would use a brown, a bronze, maybe a medium brown, like that, and some on my finger. And just kind of smudge the brown into the edges of the black. Just makes it look slightly less harsh, which you can't really see. Oh, kind of can, kind of. Shit, now I'm going to have to do it on the other eye because I'm supposed to be doing a story after this. Thank you, Danny. Yes, I've been reducing the amount of dark eye makeup I use lately because I think it was frightening the horses. Oh, we can see. Oh, good. So this is probably a makeup artist's nightmare. But to me and to people who are not so good at makeup and such, I think it looks pretty good. In case anyone is interested, the lipstick I'm wearing is, just before we get onto the story, the good bit, lipstick I'm wearing is NYX Simply Vamp Crayon à Lèvres. Yeah, my flirting face is great. It's great. I learned it from Pennywise the Clown, and he pulls. It's in the cover color She Devil or Diablesse if you are French. Shit, where is it? Oh, there it is. There it is. It's not. Is this why makeup people do put the things there behind their hand? She Devil, Diablesse. That's what it is. It's really good, actually. I've had this on since 11:30. It's 6:10 now. I've eaten, drunk, all of that. Haven't had to apply anymore. I did put a bit of Vaseline on the top to make it a little bit glossier. Would you like a Fitz cameo? We can probably arrange that. He is getting pissed off because I'm not turning his water fountain on, so we'll do a quick cameo from Fitz, and then Fitzy. And then what the fuck am I trying to do? I'm sorry, everybody. And then we'll do a story. I feel like I should start Dracula immediately, but people won't actually be there for that. Come on. Do you want to see the people? Want to see your friends? Fitzy. He thinks he's going to get a treat, so I suppose I'd better get the bag of treats out. Ah, they were right there. Fitz, what's that? Whoa. Come on. Haha. Isabella. You remember the rules? If you want the treat, you got to eat them so the people can see. There they are. Oops, that way. Putting my light squarely on him. Want that? He's a gentleman. Want that trick? Tali taught him that trick. Wait. Oh, no. He doesn't like being restrained. Nope, doesn't like it. just going to turn this water fountain on. Sorry, I know I'm live. And if I edited these afterwards, I would, I would still suck, but I would suck a little bit less. But I won't, because truth is important. Want your water? Birds? Water? Good boy. And it's 9. Oh shit, they think it's dinner time. I'm just going to leave the door open so she can come in and eat food and such. Hello, Niobe. Come on. Right, she can wander in and out as she pleases. Cat did enjoy. My cats can't be trained, but they can train. They have trained me. I really do like this makeup. I live for the drama. And people have found it very disconcerting walking through a horror maze around what they thought was a mannequin in the dark, and then you're like, surprise, bitch. I grabbed your arm. I do miss it. It's going to be another M.R. James story. Because, I love them. This one has quite a bit of Latin in it. It's not very long, though. Yeah, no, that's too much Latin. I'm not bothered. They have a financial exchange relationship where they eat my food and bring me rats. And I'm beginning to suspect they know that I don't eat rats. Ash tree number 13, Count Magnus. Treasure of Abbot Thomas starts off with a massive amount of Latin. School story, Rose Garden. Oh, I know. I remember I was going to choose. Where are you? Sorry about this. The Haunted Doll's House. It's one of my favorites because it's very quiet. It has a quiet horribility to it. I actually should have saved this when Josh is here because he might have questions. But anyway, you can ask me afterwards. It's fine. Niobe, darling, you gonna come in? No, Fitz is watching her. I'll feed them when I'm done. Right, I'm gonna read you a story now. Spooky ghost story. Oh, she is coming in. Ooh. Haunted Doll's House by M.R. James. I suppose you get stuff of that kind through your hands pretty often, said Mr. Dillett as he pointed with his stick to an object which shall be described when the time comes. And when he said it, he lied in his throat and knew that he lied. Not once in 20 years, perhaps not once in a lifetime, could Mr. Chittenden, skilled as he was in ferreting out the forgotten treasures of half a dozen counties, expect to handle such a specimen. It was collector's palaver, and Mr. Chittenden recognized it as such. Stuff of that kind, Mr. Dillett. It's a museum piece, that is. Well, I suppose there are museums who'll take anything. I've seen one not as good as that years back, said Mr. Chittenden thoughtfully. But that's not likely to come onto the market. And I'm told they have some fine ones of the period over the water. No, I'm only telling you the truth, Mr. Dillett, when I say that if you was to place an unlimited order with me for the very best that could be got, and you know I have facilities for getting to know of such things and a reputation to maintain, well, all I can say is I shall lead you straight up to that one and say, I can't do no better for you than that, sir. M.R. James loved putting on a slightly less hoity-toity voice in his readings. Hear, hear, said Mr. Dillett, applauding ironically with the end of his stick on the floor of the shop. How much are you sticking the innocent American buyer for it, eh? Oh, I shan't be over hard on the buyer, American or otherwise. You see, it stands this way, Mr. Dillett. If I knew just a bit more about the pedigree, or just a bit less, Mr. Dillett put in. Ha ha, you will have your joke, sir. No, but as I was saying, if I knew just a little bit more than I do about the piece, though anyone can see for themselves it's a genuine thing, every last corner of it, and there's not been one of my men allowed to so much as touch it since it came into the shop, there'd be another figure in the price I'm asking. And what's that? 5 and 20. Multiply that by 3 and you've got it, sir. 75's my price. And 50's mine, said Mr. Dillett. £75, £50, it is a lot for the... This is, Edwardian style times, all right? The point of agreement was, of course, somewhere between the two. It does not matter exactly where. I think 60 guineas. But half an hour later, the object was being packed, and within an hour, Mr. Dillett had called for it in his car and driven away. Mr. Chittenden, holding the cheque in his hand, saw him off from the door with smiles, and returned, still smiling, into the parlour where his wife was making the tea. He stopped at the door. "It's gone," he said. "Thank God for that," said Mrs. Chittenden, putting down the teapot. "Mr. Dillett, was it?" "Yes, it was." "Well, I'd sooner it was him than another." "Oh, I don't know. He ain't a bad fellow, my dear." "Maybe not, but in my opinion, he'd be none the worse for a bit of a shake-up." "Well, if that's your opinion, it's my opinion he's put himself into the way of getting one. Anyhow, we shan't have no more of it, and that's something to be thankful for." And so Mr. and Mrs. Chittenden sat down to tea. And what of Mr. Dillett and of his new acquisition? What it was, the title of this story would have told you. What it was like, I shall have to indicate as well as I can. The story's called The Haunted Doll's House. I can't imagine you were all in much suspense. There was only just room enough for it in the car, and Mr. Dillett had to sit with the driver. He had also to go slow, for though the rooms of the doll's house had all been stuffed carefully with soft cotton wool, jolting was to be avoided, in view of the immense number of small objects which thronged them, and the 10-mile drive was an anxious time for him, in spite of all the precautions he insisted upon. At last his front door was reached, and Collins, the butler, came out. "Look here, Collins, you must help me with this thing. It's a delicate job. We must get it out upright, see? It's full of little things that mustn't be displaced more than we can help. Let's see, where shall we have it?" After a pause for consideration. "Really, I think I shall have to put it in my own room, to begin with, at any rate. On the big table, that's it." It was conveyed, with much talking, to Mr. Dillett's spacious room on the first floor, looking out upon the drive. The sheeting was unwound from it, and the front thrown open, and for the next hour or two Mr. Dillett was fully occupied in extracting the padding and setting in order the contents of the rooms. I love Georgian dolls' houses. I love all dolls' houses. Well, the proper ones with miniatures. But to get back to this. When this thoroughly congenial task was finished, I must say that it would have been difficult to find a more perfect and attractive specimen of a doll's house in Strawberry Hill Gothic than that which now stood on Mr. Dillett's large knee-hole table, lighted up by the evening sun, which came slanting through 3 tall sash windows. Strawberry Hill Gothic is something I've heard of, but I want to say Sir Horace Walpole built a place called Strawberry Hill in the Gothic style. I don't know. You can wiki it yourself. It's fine. Doll's house. It was quite 6 feet long, including the chapel or oratory, which flanked the front on the left as you faced it, and the stable on the right. The main block of the house was, as I have said, in the Gothic manner. That is to say, the windows had pointed arches and were surmounted by what are called ogival hoods, with crockets and finials such as we see on the canopies of tombs built into church walls. At the angles were absurd turrets covered with arched panels. The chapel had pinnacles and buttresses, and a bell in the turret, and coloured glass in the windows. When the front of the house was open, you saw four large rooms: bedroom, dining room, drawing room, and kitchen, each with its appropriate furniture in a very complete state. I think Fitz is going to chase Nivy out of the bathroom again. I think. I've been looking at the book. How's my makeup doing? Yeah, see? I would advise anyone to take a small amount of black powder with them if they wanted it to last ages and if they were sweating and stuff. You don't have to. It's rock and roll. Speaking of rock and roll, listen to this description of this doll's house. Oh my god. The stable on the right was in 2 stories, with its proper complement of horses, coaches, and grooms, and with its clock and Gothic cupola for the church bell. Clock bell. God, what's wrong with me? I'm thinking about rock and roll. I'm thinking about dollhouses. Pages, of course, might be written on the outfit of the mansion. How many frying pans, how many gilt chairs, what pictures, carpets, chandeliers, 4 posters, table linen, glass, crockery, and plate it possessed. But all this must be left to the imagination. I will only say that the base or plinth on which the house stood, for it was fitted with one of some depth, which allowed a flight of steps to the front door and a terrace, partly balustraded, contained a shallow drawer or drawers, in which were neatly stored sets of embroidered curtains, changes of raiment for the inmates, and in short, all the materials for an infinite series of variations and refittings of the most absorbing and delightful kind. I want this dollhouse. I don't care. I know what it is. I don't care. I want it. Oh, bye, Nivy. Did he throw you out, the bastard? They're going to get cat food meat, don't worry. I should have put it down before this, but it doesn't matter. Oh, I'm about to tell you that I'm right about something. Quintessence of Horace Walpole, that's what it is. He must have had something to do with the making of it. Such was Mr. Dillet's murmured reflection as he knelt before it in a reverent ecstasy. Simply wonderful. This is my day and no mistake. £500 coming in this morning for that cabinet, which I never cared about, and now this tumbling into my hands for a tenth, the very most of what it would fetch in town. Well, well, it almost makes one afraid something will happen to counter it. Let's have a look at the population, anyhow. Accordingly, he set them before him in a row. Again, here is an opportunity which some would snatch at of making an inventory of the costume. I am incapable of it. There were a gentleman and a lady, in blue satin and brocade respectively. There were 2 children, a boy and a girl. There was a cook, a nurse, a footman, and there were the stable servants, 2 postilions, a coachman, 2 grooms. Anyone else? Yes, possibly. The curtains of the 4-poster in the bedroom were closely drawn around all 4 sides of it, and he put his finger in between them and felt in the bed. He drew the finger back hastily, for it almost seemed to him as if something had not stirred, perhaps, but yielded in an odd, live way as he pressed it. Then he put back the curtains, which ran on rods in the proper manner, and extracted from the bed a white-haired old gentleman in a long linen nightdress and cap, and laid him down by the rest. The tale was complete. The long linen nightdress, it's the Scrooge outfit. Should have fed him first. Dinner time was now near, so Mr. Dillet spent but 5 minutes in putting the lady and children into the drawing room, the gentleman into the dining room, the servants into the kitchen and stables, and the old man back into his bed. He retired into his dressing room next door, and we see and hear no more of him until something like 11 o'clock at night. His whim was to sleep surrounded by some of the gems of his collection. The big room in which we have seen him contained his bed, bath, wardrobe, and all the appliances of dressing were in a commodious room adjoining. But his four-poster, which itself was a valued treasure, stood in the large room where he sometimes wrote, and often sat, and even received visitors. Tonight he repaired to it in a highly complacent frame of mind. Fitz has gone outside. Now Niobe's here. There was no striking clock within earshot, none on the staircase, none in the stable, none in the distant church tower. Yet it is indubitable that Mr. Dillock was startled out of a very pleasant slumber by a bell tolling 1. He was so much startled that he did not merely lie breathless with wide open eyes, but actually sat up in his bed. He never asked himself until the morning hours how it was that, although there was no light at all in the room, the doll's house on the knee-hole table stood out with complete clearness. But it was so. The effect was that of a bright harvest moon shining full on the front of a big white stone mansion. A quarter of a mile away it might be, and yet every detail was photographically sharp. There were trees about it too. Hi, Julie! Hi! We're reading M.R. James' The Haunted Doll's House. We'll just get into the good bit. Long story short, short story short, an antiques dealer has bought this Georgian doll's house from another dealer who was glad to be rid of it. And he went to bed. Thank you. The whole previous bit is the tutorial. It's for Josh. So he went to bed that night. The doll's house was in the room with him. It is 6 feet long. Like, it is a huge doll's house. I want it. And he woke up hearing a clock strike 1. And he doesn't actually... There is no clock anywhere near him or his house. He never asked himself till the morning hours how it was that, though there was no light at all in the room, the doll's house on the knee-hole table stood out with complete clearness. But it was so. The effect was that of a bright harvest moon shining full on the front of a big white stone mansion. A quarter of a mile away it might be, and yet every detail was photographically sharp. There were trees about it too, trees rising behind the chapel and the house. He seemed to be conscious of the scent of a cool, still September night. He thought he could hear an occasional stamp and clink from the stables, as of horses stirring. And with another shock, he realized that above the house he was looking not at the wall of his room with its pictures, but into the profound blue of a night sky. There were lights, more than one, in the windows, and he quickly saw that this was no 4-roomed house with a movable front, but one of many rooms and staircases, a real house, but seen as if through the wrong end of a telescope. You mean to show me something, he muttered to himself, and he gazed earnestly on the lighted windows. I think that's the rescue helicopter. Good timing, helicopter, you piece of shit. That saves many lives. Oh, I can't shut the door. Niobe's lying across the threshold. I pretend she's guarding me. She's not. She's being a bitch. There were lights, more than one, in the windows, and he quickly saw that this was no 4-roomed house with a movable front, but one of many rooms and staircases. A real house, but seen as if through the wrong end of a telescope. You mean to show me something, he muttered to himself, and he gazed earnestly on the lighted windows. They would in real life have been shuttered or curtained, no doubt. He thought. But as it was, there was nothing to intercept his view of what was being transacted inside the rooms. 2 rooms were lighted, one on the ground floor to the right of the door, one upstairs on the left. the first brightly enough, the other rather dimly. The lower room was the dining room. A table was laid, but the meal was over, and only wine and glasses were left on the table. The man of the blue satin and the woman of the brocade were alone in the room, and they were talking very earnestly, seated close together at the table, their elbows on it, every now and again stopping to listen, as it seemed. Also, Julie, there's a little family of dollies in there. There's a mummy and a daddy and two children and an old man who lives in a four-poster bed and a few servant dollies. I don't think they're important. Doesn't that say everything? Once he rose, came to the window and opened it and put his head out and his hand to his ear. There was a lighted taper on the side in a silver there was a lighted taper in a silver candlestick on a sideboard. When the man left the window, he seemed to leave the room also, and the lady, taper in hand, remained standing and listening. A taper is a candle. A kind of candle. The expression on her face was that of one striving her utmost to keep down a fear that threatened to master her, and succeeding. It was a hateful face, too, broad, flat, and sly. Now the man came back, and she took some small thing from him and hurried out of the room. He too disappeared, but only for a moment or two. The front door slowly opened, and he stepped out and stood on the top of the perron, looking this way and that, then turned towards the upper window that was lighted and shook his fist. Old man yells at window. This is the young man, though. This is the daddy, Dolly. It was time to look at that upper window. Through it was seen a four-post bed, a nurse or other servant in an armchair, evidently sound asleep. In the bed, an old man lying, awake and, one would say, anxious from the way in which he shifted about and moved his fingers, beating tunes on the coverlet. Beyond the bed, a door opened. Light was seen on the ceiling, and the lady came in. She set down her candle on the table, came to the fireside, and roused the nurse. In her hand she had an old-fashioned wine bottle ready uncorked. The nurse took it, poured some of the contents into a little silver saucepan, added some spice and sugar from casters on the table, and set it to warm on the fire. Meanwhile, the old man in the bed beckoned feebly to the lady, who came to him, smiling, took his wrist as if to feel his pulse, and bit her lip as if in consternation. I can't bite my lip, I'll get lipstick on my teeth. Ew, why would anyone bite your lip? He looked at her anxiously and then pointed to the window and spoke. She nodded and did as the man below had done, opened the casement and listened, perhaps rather ostentatiously, then drew her head in and shook it, looking at the old man, who seemed to sigh. Sorry, I'm just wiggling myself up on this couch. Navy's looking so much better now. By this time, the posset on the fire was steaming, and the nurse poured it into a small two-handled silver bowl and brought it to the bedside. Heated up wine with, herbs and spices in it. Milk, you can put milk in there, make a caudle, I believe. Although I'm tired, so I may be forgetting things. The old man seemed disinclined for it and was waving it away, but the lady and the nurse together bent over him and evidently pressed it upon him. He must have yielded, for they supported him into a sitting position and put it to his lips. He drank most of it, in several draughts, and they laid him down. The lady left the room, smiling good night to him, and took the bowl, the bottle, and the silver saucepan with her. The nurse returned to the chair, and there was an interval of complete quiet. Suddenly, the old man started up in his bed, and he must have uttered some cry, for the nurse started out of her chair and made but one step of it to the bedside. He was a sad and terrible sight, flushed in the face, almost to blackness, the eyes glaring whitely, both hands clutching at his heart and foam at his lips. For a moment the nurse left him, ran to the door, flung it wide open, and One supposer screamed aloud for help, then darted back to the bed and seemed to try feverishly to soothe him, to lay him down, anything. But as the lady, her husband, and several servants rushed into the room with horrified faces, the old man collapsed under the nurse's hands and lay back, and the features, contorted with agony and rage, relaxed slowly into calm. A few moments later, lights showed out to the left of the house, and a coach with flambeaux drove up to the door. It has lights on it, indicating they rode through the night. A white-wigged man in black got nimbly out and ran up the steps, carrying a small leather trunk-shaped box. He was met in the doorway by the man and his wife, she with her handkerchief clutched between her hands, he with a tragic face but retaining his self-control. They led the newcomer into the dining room, where he set his box of papers on the table, and, turning to them, listened with a face of consternation at what they had to tell. He nodded his head again and again, threw out his hands slightly, declined, it seemed, offers of refreshment and lodging for the night, and within a few minutes came slowly down the steps, entering the coach and driving off the way he had come. As the man in blue watched him from the top of the steps, a smile not pleasant to see stole slowly over his white face. Darkness fell over the whole scene as the lights of the coach disappeared. But Mr. Dillett, the antique dealer who has bought the doll's house, Mr. Dillett remained sitting up in the bed. He had rightly guessed that there would be a sequel. The house front glimmered out again before long, but now there was a difference. The lights were in other windows, one at the top of the house, the other illuminating the range of coloured windows of the chapel. How he saw through these is not quite obvious, but he did. The interior was as carefully furnished as the rest of the establishment, with its minute red cushions on the desks, its Gothic stall canopies, and its western gallery and pinnacled organ with gold pipes. On the centre of the black and white pavement was a bier. 4 tall candles burned at the corners. On the bier was a coffin covered with a pall of black velvet. A bier is the table the coffin goes on, a pall is the cloth the coffin goes under. We're learning. As he looked, the folds of the pall stirred. It seemed to rise at one end. It slid downwards, fell away, exposing the black coffin with its silver handles and nameplate. One of the tall candlesticks swayed and toppled over. Ask no more, but turn, as Mr. Dillett hastily did, and look in at the lighted window at the top of the house, where a boy and girl lay in 2 truckle beds, and a 4-poster for the nurse rose above them. The nurse was not visible for the moment, but the father and mother were there, dressed now in mourning, but with very little sign of mourning in their demeanour. Indeed, they were laughing and talking with a good deal of animation, sometimes to each other, and sometimes throwing a remark to one or other of the children, and again laughing at the answers. Then the father was seen to go on tiptoe out of the room, taking with him as he went a white garment that hung on a peg near the door. He shut the door after him. A minute or two later it was slowly opened again, and a muffled head poked around it. A bent form of sinister shape stepped across to the truckle beds and suddenly stopped, threw up its arms and revealed, of course, the father laughing. The children were in agonies of terror, the boy with the bedclothes over his head, the girl throwing herself out of bed into her mother's arms. Attempts at consolation followed. The parents took the children on their laps, patted them, picked up the white gown and showed there was no harm in it, and so forth, and at last, putting the children back into bed, left the room with encouraging waves of the hand. As they left it, the nurse came in, and soon the light died down. Still Mr. Dillett watched, immovable. I'll take a dramatic sip. Still not sponsored by Diet Coke. I wouldn't want to be. A new sort of light, not of lamp or candle, a pale, ugly light began to dawn around the door case at the back of the room. The door was opening again. The seer does not like to dwell upon what he saw entering the room. He says it might be described as a frog, the size of a man, but it had scanty white hair about its head. It was busy about the truckle beds, but not for long. The sound of cries, faint as if coming out of a vast distance, but even so infinitely appalling, reached the ear. There were signs of a hideous commotion all over the house. Lights moved along and up, and doors opened and shut, and running figures passed within the windows. The clock in the stable turret tolled one, and darkness fell again. It was only dispelled once more to show the house front. At the bottom of the steps, dark figures were drawn up in two lines, holding flaming torches. More dark figures came down the steps, bearing first one, then another small coffin. And the lines of torchbearers with the coffins between them moved silently onward to the left. The hours of night passed on. Never so slowly, Mr. Dillett thought. Gradually he sank down from sitting to lying in his bed, but he did not close an eye, and early next morning he sent for the doctor. The doctor found him in a disquieting state of nerves and recommended sea air. Sea air. My accent makes it hard. Air from the sea. To a quiet place on the east coast, he accordingly repaired by easy stages in his car. This is around the 1919, 1920 mark. Oh, it's probably way later than that, and I've made a fool of myself. One of the first people he met on the seafront was Mr. Chittenden, the guy who sold him the house, Doll's House, who, it appeared, had likewise been advised to take his wife away for a bit of a change. Mr. Chittenden looked somewhat askance upon him when they met, and not without cause. Well, I don't wonder at you being a bit upset, Mr. Dillett. What? Yes, well, I might say horrible upset, to be sure, seeing what me and my poor wife went through ourselves. But I put it to you, Mr. Dillett, one of two things. Was I going to scrap a lovely piece like that on the one hand, or was I going to tell customers, I'm selling you a regular picture palace drama in real life of the olden time, billed to perform regular at 1 o'clock a.m.? Why, what would you have said yourself? And next thing you know, two justices of the peace in the back parlour, and poor Mr. and Mrs. Chittenden off in a spring cart to the county asylum, and everyone in the street saying, I thought it'd come to that. Look at the way that man drank. And me next door but one, to a total abstainer, as you know. Well, that was my position. What, me have it back in the shop? What do you think? No, but I'll tell you what I will do. You shall have your money back, bar the £10 I paid for it, and you make what you can. Later in the day, in what is offensively called the smoke room of the hotel, any room I'm in is the smoke room, because I'm a little dangerous around fire. No, I'm allowed matches and stuff. I'm allowed all that stuff. Now, later that day, in what is offensively called the smoke room of the hotel, a murmured conversation between the two went on for some time. How much do you really know about that thing and where it came from? Honest, Mr. Dillett, I don't know the house. Of course, it came out of the lumber room of a country house. That anyone could guess. But I'll go so far as to say this. I believe it's not 100 miles from this place. Which direction and how far, I've no notion. I'm only judging by guesswork. The man as I actually paid the cheque to ain't one of my regular men, and I've lost sight of him. But I have the idea that this part of the country was his beat, and that's every word I can tell you. But now, Mr. Dillett, there's one other thing that rather physics me. That old chap. I suppose you saw him drive up to the door. I thought so. Now, would he have been the medical man, do you take it? My wife would have it so, but I stuck to it that it was the lawyer, because he had papers with him, and the one he took out was folded up. I agree, said Mr. Dillett. Thinking it over, I came to the conclusion that was the old man's will, ready to be signed. Just what I thought, said Mr. Chittenden. And I took it that Will would have cut out the young people, eh? Well, well, it's been a lesson to me, I know that. I shan't buy no more dolls' houses, nor waste no more money on the pictures. And as to this business of poisoning Grandpa, well, if I know myself, I never had much of a turn for that. Live and let live. That's been my motto throughout life, and I ain't found it a bad one. I think I'm getting slightly better at doing the humorous middle class fellow Monty was so fond of. Filled with these elevated sentiments, Mr. Chittenden retired to his lodgings. Mr. Dillett next day repaired to the local institute, where he hoped to find some clue to the riddle that absorbed him. He gazed in despair at a long file of the Canterbury and York Society's publications of the parish registers of the district. No print resembling the house of his nightmare was among those that hung on the staircase and in the passages. Disconsolate, he found himself at last in a derelict room, staring at a dusty model of a church in a dusty glass case. Model of St. Stephen's Church, Coxham, presented by J. Merriweather Esquire of Ilbridge House, 1877. The work of his ancestor, James Merriweather, died 1786. There was something in the fashion of it that reminded him dimly of his horror. He retraced his steps on a wall map he had noticed and made out that Ilbridge House was in Coxham Parish. Coxham was, as it happened, one of the parishes of which he had retained the name when he glanced over the file of printed registers, and it was not long before he found in them the record of the burial of Roger Milford, aged 76, on the 11th of September 1757, and of Roger and Elizabeth Merriweather, aged 9 and 8, on the 19th of the same month. It seemed worthwhile to follow up this clue, frail as it was, and in the afternoon he drove out to Coxham. The east end of the north aisle of the church is a Milford chapel, and on its north wall are tablets to the same persons. Roger, the elder, it seems, was distinguished by all the qualities which adorn the father, the magistrate, and the man. The memorial was erected by his attached daughter Elizabeth, who did not long survive the loss of a parent, ever solicitous for her welfare, and of 2 amiable children. The last sentence was plainly an addition to the original inscription. A yet later slab told of James Merriweather, husband of Elizabeth, who in the dawn of life practiced, not without success, those arts which, had he continued their exercise, might, in the opinion of the most competent judges, have earned for him the name of the British Vitruvius, but who, overwhelmed by the visitation which deprived him of an affectionate partner and a blooming offspring, passed his prime and age in a secluded yet elegant retirement, his grateful nephew and heir indulges a pious sorrow by this too brief recital of his excellences. The children were more simply commemorated. Both died on the night of the 12th of September. Mr. Dillett felt sure that in Ilbridge House he had found the scene of his drama. In some old sketchbook, possibly in some old print, he may yet find convincing evidence that he is right. But the Ilbridge House of today is not that which he sought. It is an Elizabethan erection of the 40s, in red brick with stone coins and dressings. A quarter of a mile from it, in a low part of the park, backed by ancient stag-horned, ivy-strangled trees and thick undergrowth, are marks of a terraced platform, overgrown with rough grass. A few stone balusters lie here and there, and a heap or two, covered in nettles and ivy, of wrought stones with badly carved crockets. This, someone told Mr. Dillett, was the site of an older house. As he drove out of the village, the hall clock struck 4, and Mr. Dillett started up and clapped his hands to his ears. It was not the first time he had heard that bell. Awaiting an offer from the other side of the Atlantic, Doll's House still reposes, carefully sheeted, in a loft over Mr. Dillett's stables, whither Collins conveyed it on the day when Mr. Dillett started for the East Coast. The end. And although I know I shouldn't criticize literally the master of the English ghost story, I I think it would have been scarier if they'd ended it on it was not the first time he had heard that bell. But then again, I really like a punchy last sentence, and M.R. James kind of preferred not a letdown of an ending, but more of a wind down to put us back into the real world. You know, we get in the beginning of the stories, everything's very ordinary. Like, we're chatting to some other professors in the college, and they're like, you should go have a holiday. And then something, you know, you see a horrible ghost crawl out of a well. It's not very nice. And then you come back and you play golf or whatever. Like, James is just sure to pick us up from the normal world. The thing happens, he puts us back in the normal world. He is the absolute master of the ghost story, but I just prefer my scary stories to end on a punch. Yeah. So the Haunted Doll's House is one that's it stuck with me for a long time because of the narrative that it tells, obviously, of the you know the parents and pretending that they're listening for the lawyer, but they're not. I imagine they know that he's going to be there too late. The mother smiling as she says goodnight to. It's not really clear which of. Oh no, it would be the husband's father because they have the same surname. She could be a cousin. Doesn't matter. She's smiling anyway. She says goodnight to her father-in-law, who she's just poisoned. He is about to die. And then the next day, the adults are all dressed in mourning, but they're like capering around. They're playing stupid ghost tricks on their kids and laughing. They're having a great time because I guess he was going to change the will, but they killed him before he could, and now they're in the money, honey. They're loving it. The bit, especially where the father pretends to be a ghost and scares the kids, is particularly grotesque when, you know, the nurse falls asleep. And this is just one of. Oh, sweetie. This is just one of my favorite. What am I sitting on? My phone. It's one of my favorite things in any horror story ever. That the form that came in was busy about the truckle beds. It says so much and it says nothing. That's just kind of what haunts me about it. I mean, the whole murder is horrible. But this creature busy about the truckle beds. It's just a nasty phrase, you know. Which M.R. James was incredible at. And he would put something like that into a story. He didn't do too much of it at a time. He would give you this one chilling thing, and all of the rest of it would be a really good story, you know, a story rooted in reality, and this one uncanny, unseemly thing to stick with you. Yeah. There's a reason they call him the master of the English ghost story. It wasn't just me. People do. Oh, she's so sweet. Oh, I forgot to explain what a truckle bed is. Okay. Well, it is spelled truckle bed. Although it does mean truffle. It does sound like truffle bed when I say it. You know a big four-poster bed, right? You could get a small bed on wheels sometimes, slide it under the bed during the daytime, right? And then at nighttime you pull out the small beds. I think Americans call them a cot sometimes, which is really weird because we say cot when we mean a baby's crib. And then again, we say crib when we mean batch. I hate all of it. Trundle bed. Yes. Yeah, truckle bed is the same thing as a trundle bed. Yeah. So the ghost was doing something around the children's beds, and obviously in the morning they were dead. So we don't. Yeah. Yep. Poor Roger and Elizabeth, aged 9 and 7. No, that's okay. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been good. You wouldn't have liked it. So yeah, it just makes the dad scaring them by dressing up as a ghost, kind of bitterly ironic. I mean, maybe the kids woke up a bit and thought it was just their dad being a dick again. Well, you see, the mushroom has a very interesting cellular structure, and with the way it grows, it's actually more akin to the cellular structure of a ghost than it is to a plant. That's why they call them ghost plants. And when a ghost becomes tired, or when their original domicile or the place where they were murdered is torn down, sometimes they do just sort of rest in mushrooms. That's why I eat them. I'm always trying to eat ghosts. I don't see what's wrong with my theory other than the fact that it's backed up by absolutely nothing. I would also like to read you. Next time I have a really short one to read you, I would like to read Rats by the same author. Oh god, it's so short. Okay. Show of hands. Who would like me to read Rats by Montague Rhodes James? A very short story that we can just chuck in here because I didn't give any Marjorie today. No one wants me to? Well, too bad. Rats by Montague Rhodes James. Actually, sorry, I want to check the dates that Oh, they don't have a thing in the front with all the stories and when they were first published. Oh, that's so annoying. Awesome. Hello, Will Stewart. I don't know who you are, but hello. Welcome. Right. So he published his M.R. James. He published his stories in 1904. He published a collection in 1911, 1919, and 1925. So that's kind of the period we're looking at here. Rats. It begins with a quote in little italicas. All your votes count as 7 yes votes. Or no, depending on which one I want. And if you was to walk through the bedrooms now, you'd see the ragged, mouldy bedclothes a heaving and a heaving like seas. And a heaving with what, he says. Why, with the rats under him. I do not know where that's from. I feel like it's Dickens. I don't know why I think that. But was it with the rats, I ask, because in another case it was not. I cannot put a date to the story, but I was young when I heard it, and the teller was old. It is an ill-proportioned tale, but that is my fault, not his. It happened in Suffolk, near the coast, in a place where the road makes a sudden dip and then a sudden rise. As you go northward, at the top of that rise stands a house on the left of the road. It is a tall red brick house, narrow for its height, Perhaps it was built about 1770. The top of the front has low triangular pediment with a round window in the centre. Behind it are stables and offices, and such garden as it has is behind them. Scraggy Scotch firs are near it. An expanse of gorse-covered land stretches away from it. It commands a view of the distant sea from the upper windows of the front. A sign on a post stands before the door, or did so stand, for though it was an inn of repute once, I believe it is so no longer. To this inn came my acquaintance, Mr. Thompson, when he was a young man, on a fine spring day, coming from the University of Cambridge and desirous of solitude and tolerable quarters and time for reading. These he found, for the landlord and his wife had been in service and could make a visitor comfortable, and there was no one else staying in the inn. He had a large room on the first floor commanding the road and the view, and if it faced east, why, that could not be helped, and the house was well built and warm. I don't know what's wrong with a house facing east, honestly. Is it just unlucky? I don't know. He spent very tranquil and uneventful days. Work all the morning, an afternoon perambulation of the country round, a little conversation with country company or people of the inn in the evening over the then fashionable drink of brandy and water, a little more reading and writing, and bed, and he would have been content that this should continue for the full month he had at his disposal. So well was his work progressing, and so fine was the April of that year, which I have reason to believe was that which Orlando Whistlecraft chronicles in his weather record as the charming year. It's really annoying me, I don't know what year that is. How can I picture what's happening if I don't know what year that is? I'm sorry, Monty. You've given me so much. One of his walks took him along the northern road, which stands high and traverses a wide common called a heath. Yeah. Some people would like it. Not one of them, personally. On the bright afternoon when he first chose this direction, his eye caught a white object some hundreds of yards to the left of the road, and he felt it necessary to make sure what this might be. It was not long before he was standing beside it, and found himself looking at a square block of white stone fashioned somewhat like the base of a pillar, with a square hole in the upper surface. Just another you may see at this day on Thetford Heath. After taking stock of it, he contemplated for a few minutes the view, which offered a church tower or two, some red roofs of cottages and windows winking in the sun, and the expanse of sea also with an occasional wink and gleam upon it, and so pursued his way. Oh dear, there's more accented talk coming up. In the desultory evening talk in the bar, he asked why the white stone was there on the common. An old-fashioned thing, that is, said the landlord, Mr. Betts. We was none of us alive when that was put there. I know it's a scary story, I'm sorry. That's right, said another. It stands pretty high, said Mr. Thompson. I dare say a sea mark was on it some time back. Ah, yes, Mr. Betts agreed. I have heard they could see it from the boats. But whatever there was, it's fell to bits this long time. Good job, too, said a third. 'Twarn't a lucky mark, by what the old man used to say. Not lucky for the fishing, I mean to say. Why ever not? Said Thompson, speaking properly. It doesn't say speaking properly, obviously. Well, I never see it myself, was the answer. But they had some funny ideas, what I mean peculiar, them old chaps, and I shouldn't wonder but that they made away with it themselves. It was impossible to get anything clearer than this. The company, never very voluble, fell silent. When next someone spoke, it was of village affairs and crops. Mr. Betts was the speaker. I think the voice I'm doing is a fucking Samwise Gamgee one. Oh, I think Naomi's asleep. I want to take a picture of her. I think she's asleep guarding me in my home. I got it. I'll post it. Yeah, exactly. I don't even know where their accent's from. I want to say the west of England, Cornwall. I have no idea. I have no idea. I've left New Zealand twice, and both times it was to Sydney. So, just like New Zealand's older, more racist cousin. We're just as racist. We're just quieter about it. Sorry, right. When next someone spoke, it was a village affairs and crops. Mr. Betts was the speaker. Yeah, it's definitely Sussex because that's what he said it was in the thing, and that's the voice I was doing. So that makes sense. Who is it, Flora? Is it a human or is it a cat? Doesn't matter. I can't shut the door because Ivy's guarding me. Not every day did Thompson consult his health by taking a country walk. One very fine afternoon found him busily writing at 3 o'clock. Then he stretched himself and rose, and walked out of his room into the passage. Facing him was another room, then the stairhead, then two more rooms, one looking out to the back, the other to the south. At the south end of the passage was a window, to which he went, considering with himself that it was rather a shame to waste such a fine afternoon. However, work was paramount just at that moment. He thought he would just take 5 minutes off and go back to it, and those 5 minutes he would employ, the Bettses could not possibly object, to looking at the other rooms in the passage, which he had never seen. Nobody at all, it seemed, was indoors. Probably, as it was market day, they were all gone to the town, except perhaps a maid in the bar. Very still the house was, and the sun shone really hot. Early flies buzzed in the window panes. So he explored. The room facing his own was undistinguished except for an old print of Bury St. Edmunds. The two next to him on his side of the passage were gay and clean, with one window apiece, whereas his had two. Remained the southwest room, opposite to the last which he had entered. This was locked. But Thompson was in a mood of quite indefensible curiosity, and feeling confident that there could be no damaging secrets in a place so easily got at, he proceeded to fetch the key of his own room, and when that did not answer, to collect the keys of the other three. One of them fitted, and he opened the door. The room had two windows looking south and west, so it was bright, and the sun was as hot upon it as can be. Here there was no carpet, but bare boards. No pictures, no washstand, only a bed in the farther corner. An iron bed, with mattress and bolster, covered with a bluish check counterpane. A sheet. As featureless a room as you can well imagine. And yet there was something that made Thompson close the door very quickly, yet very quietly behind him, and lean against the window sill in the passage, actually quivering all over. It was this, that under the counterpane someone lay, and not only lay, but stirred. That it was someone and not something was certain, because the shape of a head was unmistakable on the bolster, and yet it was all covered, and no one lies with covered head but a dead person, and this was not dead, not truly dead, for it heaved and shivered. If he had seen these things in dusk or by the light of a flickering candle, Thompson could have comforted himself and talked of fancy. On this bright day, that was impossible. What was to be done? First, lock the door at all costs. Eek. Very gingerly he approached it and, bending down, listened, holding his breath. Perhaps there might be a sound of heavy breathing and a prosaic explanation. There was absolute silence. But as, with a rather tremulous hand, he put the key into its hole and turned it, it rattled, and on the instant a stumbling, padding tread was heard coming towards the door. Thompson fled like a rabbit to his room and locked himself in. Futile enough, he knew it was. Would doors and locks be any obstacle to what he suspected? But it was all he could think of at the moment. And in fact, nothing happened. Only there was a time of acute suspense, followed by a misery of doubt as of what to do. The impulse, of course, was to slip away as soon as possible from a house which contained such an inmate. But only the day before he had said he should be staying for at least a week more, and how, if he changed plans, could he avoid the suspicion of having pried into places where he certainly had no business? Moreover, either the Bettses knew all about the inmate and yet did not leave the house, or knew nothing, which equally meant that there was nothing to be afraid of, or knew just enough to make them shut up the room, but not enough to weigh on their spirits. In any of these cases, it seemed that not much was to be feared, and certainly so far he had had no sort of ugly experience. On the whole, the line of least resistance was to stay. Well, he stayed out his week. Nothing took him past that door, and as often as he would pause in a quiet hour of day or night in the passage and listen, no sound whatever issued from that direction. You might have thought that Thompson would have made some effort at ferreting out stories connected with the inn, hardly perhaps from Betts, but from the parson of the parish or old people in the village, but no, the reticence which commonly falls on people who have had strange experiences and believe them was upon him. Nevertheless, as the end of his stay drew near, his yearning after some kind of explanation grew more and more acute. On his solitary walks, he persisted in planning out some way, the least obtrusive, of getting another daylight glimpse into that room, and eventually arrived at this scheme. He would leave by an afternoon train, about 4 o'clock. When his fly was waiting, taxi essentially, and his luggage on it, he would make one last expedition upstairs to look around his own room and see if anything was left unpacked, and then, with that key which he had contrived to oil, as if that made any difference, the door should once more be opened, for a moment, and shut. So it worked out. The bill was paid, consequent small talk gone through while the fly was loaded. Pleasant part of the country, been very comfortable. Thanks to you and Mrs. Betts, hope to come back sometime, on one side. On the other, very glad you've found satisfaction, sir, done our best. Always glad to have your good word. Very much favour with been with the weather, to be sure. Then, I'll just take a look upstairs in case I've left a book or something out. No, don't trouble. I'll be back in a minute. And as noiselessly as possible, he stole to the door and opened it. The shattering of the illusion. He almost laughed aloud. Propped, or you might say sitting, on the edge of the bed was nothing in the round world but a scarecrow. A scarecrow out of the garden, of course, dumped into the deserted room. Yes, but here amusement ceased. Have scarecrows bare bony feet? Do their heads loll onto their shoulders? Have they iron collars and links of chain about their necks? Can they get up and move, if never so stiffly, across a floor with wagging head and arms close at their sides, and shiver? The slam of the door, the dash to the stairhead, the leap downstairs were followed by a faint. Awaking, Thompson saw Betts standing over him with the brandy bottle and a very reproachful face. You shouldn't have done so, sir, really, you shouldn't. It ain't a kind way to act by persons as done the best they could for you. Thompson heard words of this kind, but what he said in reply he did not know. Mr. Betts, and perhaps even more Mrs. Betts, found it hard to accept his apologies and his assurances that he would say no word that could damage the good name of the house. However, they were accepted. Since the train could not now be caught, it was arranged that Thompson should be driven to the town to sleep there. Before he went, the Bettses told him what little they knew. They says he was landlord here a long time back, and was in with the highwaymen that had their beat round the heath. That's how he come by his end. Hung on chains, as they say, up where you see that stone where the gallows stood in. Yes, the fishermen made away with that, I believe, because they see it out at sea and it kept the fish off, according to their idea. Yes, we had the account from the people that had the house before we came. You keep that room shut up, they says, but don't move the bed out, and you'll find there won't be no trouble. And no more has there been. Not once you haven't come out into the house, though what he may do now there ain't no saying. Anyway, you're the first I know on that's seen him since we've been here. I never set eyes on him myself, nor don't want. And ever since we've made the servants' room in the stabling, we ain't had no difficulty that way. Only I do hope, sir, as you'll keep a close tongue, considering how an house do get talked about, with more to this effect. The promise of silence was kept for many years. The occasion of my hearing the story at last was this, that when Mr. Thompson came to stay with my father, it fell to me to show him to his room, and instead of letting me open the door for him, he stepped forward and threw it open himself, and then for some moments stood in the doorway, holding up his candle and looking narrowly into the interior. Then he seemed to recollect himself and said, I beg your pardon. Very absurd, but I can't help doing that for a particular reason. What that reason was, I heard some days afterwards, and you have heard now. The end. The end. Betsy. He's trying to get in. Actually, I suppose the least I can do is sort of move this for you, so you can see Niobe. And I can't quite get it. Fitz! Yeah, you can just. Fitz! He wants to come in, but he can't because of Niobe. Oh, look, you can see them both. Fitzy! You coming in? Come on. No. He's not in the mood to be a content creator. Yes, she's my tiny little bouncer. She feels so nice now. She's been putting on weight and she feels like a proper cat. And I feel very, very, very clever for having done that. Yeah, so Rats, it's a very short story. I think I handled the accents quite well, actually, in this one, since they were typed out a bit more broad than the other ones. But yeah, I mean, you can see the influence of M.R. James on Silent Hill. They have admitted that his stories are an influence, because that image of a thing lying under a sheet on a bed and then it stirs, moves, very Silent Hill. Sticks in your head too. It's pretty horrible. It's a person lying with a sheet over their face. That's not what a lot of people do. It's freaky. And then the second go around where he thinks, oh, it's a scarecrow. That's so funny. Oh my god, it's got human feet. It's a fucked up rotting skeleton thing. Oh no. Oh no. That is its head rolling. The arms are by its sides and it's shivering. You know? It's the kind of walk that we would do in the maze to scare the shit out of people. Well, it's the kind of thing I would do in the maze to scare the shit out of people because I am well read. I'm going to be a fantastic ghost one day. I've read so many ghost stories. Yep. I miss the cool people that I used to do it with. There are only a few cool people left anymore, so goodbye, England's Rose to the Horror Maze. But yeah, thank you all for joining me for this very simple makeup thing for very simple makeup people. If you're a real makeup artist, you're probably horrified. See how it goes into the creases there? If I'd used a primer or anything, it probably wouldn't. Yeah. But like, this is a tutorial just for a one-off that you're wearing to a concert or something. If you don't think you're going to use eyeshadow primer, then don't buy it. You can use a bit of concealer. Most people don't mind if you borrow a bit of concealer off them. But yeah, the black powder to set the crayon. Pretty important. Thank you, Julie, for being here. Thank you so much for getting caught up and getting scared. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, John. Thank you, Will. Thank you. Alex was here earlier. What are you doing? She's going to throw up a hairball pretty soon. Thank you, level 426 squid. Yeah, she is going to throw up a hairball. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to go make sure Navy does not throw up a hairball on my floor. And Josh, if you find this helpful, yay. And if you don't, I don't know, just ask me to do it again better or something. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. I'll get back to Marjorie Camp tomorrow, which is a Monday. Thank you. Bye. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I don't care.